They thought they could steal my home with nothing but arrogance and a forged piece of paper. One woman, loud, entitled, waving her clipboard like it was a crown, claimed my private cabin for 100 strangers as if my family's land was her playground. But the moment she rattled my gate, she didn't realize she was rattling a hornet's nest. By the end of that day, her lies would unravel, her husband would be in handcuffs, and the truth would echo louder than her threats. My grandfather used to tell me that land is not just dirt and timber. He said it breathes with the memory of the hands that built upon it, the sweat poured into every board, and the stubbornness of those who refused to give it up. He proved that with his own life. Long before the HOA existed, long before entitled neighbors with clipboards thought they could dictate every blade of grass, my grandfather carved a home out of the mountainside. With only an axe, a hammer, and his unbreakable will, he raised a cabin from the trees he felled himself. Each beam, each nail carried his signature. He left it to me not as just a house, but as a legacy, a fortress of independence. His only instruction was simple, and it has echoed in my head for years. Never let anyone make you feel small on your own land. That promise is the core of who I am. Every plank of that porch, every stone in the foundation reminds me of him. Over time, I added my own touches. The iron gate I welded by hand, heavy and intricate, wasn't just security, it was a statement. 4 high-definition cameras perched discreetly in the trees kept a silent vigil, their feeds wired into my study and my phone. I built it all for peace of mind, but I always knew one day peace would be tested. Because out here, peace is fragile. It takes just one person, one selfish act to shatter it. That Saturday morning was the kind that makes you forget the world has sharp edges. The air was crisp, with the scent of pine and wet earth. The lake below gleamed like polished obsidian, still and perfect. A woodpecker tapped somewhere in the distance. Bacon sizzled in the pan inside, and my coffee was hot in my hands as I leaned on the porch rail. For a brief moment, I believed I was untouchable. But the truth is, solitude attracts intruders, like light attracts moths. The HOA, those self-appointed rulers of lawns and driveways, had left me alone for years because they knew, or so I thought, that my land wasn't under their thumb. It was exempt, legally separated by a county amendment that clearly declared my cabin and the surrounding acres were outside HOA jurisdiction. I even laminated that clause once just to remind myself I wasn't crazy. Still, I always suspected it was only a matter of time before someone in their ranks tried to test me. That morning, the test arrived at 10:17 a.m., not with a polite knock, but with a pounding, so loud it reverberated through the trees, like a war drum. My coffee mug rattled on the wooden rail. I set it down slowly, letting the sound roll through me. It wasn't a neighbor's knock. It was a demand. I didn't rush. Instead, I walked into my study and glanced at the monitor connected to my gate cameras. There, it was a silver SUV parked directly in front of the gate. The kind of car people drive when they want to look important without earning it. Standing beside it was Mitch Karen's husband, pounding his knuckles against the wrought iron scrollwork like he owned the place. His smug smirk filled the screen, as if he knew the noise alone would shake me out of my comfort. And then there was Karen. Clipboard in hand, her posture screamed authority she didn't have. She craned her neck to peek past the gate, eyes narrowing at the sight of my cabin in the distance. Behind her, a few curious faces were already gathering, neighbors drawn like vultures to the scent of drama. My jaw tightened. I had seen her pull this stunt before, with others bully them into compliance, wave around some paperwork, and declare it community cooperation. But this was my land, and she had just stepped into the wrong battlefield. I walked outside, each step deliberate, until I stood behind the iron bars separating us. Mitch rapped the gate again just to prove a point. "Functional, huh?" he sneered, eyeing the keypad on the side. Karen didn't even look at him. She fixed her gaze on me, clipboard raised like a judge's gavel. "We're having our annual summer retreat today," she said with the confidence of a politician on a stage. 100 guests? I sent you the notice last week." I almost laughed. "You don't have my email. You don't serve me. And this," I gestured at the land behind me, the cabin that my grandfather had built with his bare hands, "is not community property." Her smile didn't falter. "Daniel, nobody's trying to take anything. This is cooperation. We'll need the cabin unlocked, the lake cleared for pontoon rentals. It'll be over by evening." I felt a slow burn rise in my chest. Cooperation requires consent. She knew it, and yet here she was, acting as though my home was just another HOA pavilion to reserve. "Karen," I said evenly, "there's been a mistake. A delusion, maybe. This cabin is private, always has been." Behind her, 2 vans pulled up. Doors opened, and people spilled out dressed for a summer party, polo shirts, sundresses, coolers in hand. They started murmuring, as if waiting for the gate to swing open. My sanctuary was becoming a circus. I placed my hand on the gate handle. For a split second, I caught the flicker of triumph in Karen's eyes. She thought I was about to comply. Instead, I pulled the gates together with a resounding clang. One heavy lock clicked shut. Then another salvaged from a bank vault slammed into place. The sound was final, like a judge's verdict. I looked Karen dead in the eyes. This property is not reserved. It's occupied by me. Have a nice day. Her face faltered just for a moment before she turned to the crowd, ready to spin her story. I could already feel the weight of what was coming. She wasn't going to stop here. She never did. This was just the first move in a game she thought she could win. But she had forgotten one thing. My grandfather's words weren't just advice, they were a warning. No one makes me small on my own land. And Karen was about to learn that the hard way. When the gate slammed shut with that heavy double lock, I thought, maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to send them scattering. But people like Karen don't fold. They double down, her face pale and tight with fury twisted into something almost theatrical. She spun on her heels, clipboard raised like a weapon, and called out to the crowd that was still streaming from the vans. Everyone don't panic, mister. Gray is simply confused about the community property bylaws. Confused. The audacity nearly made me laugh. This wasn't confusion, it was theft dressed up in pastel sundresses and boat shoes. 100 strangers were on the shoulder of my quiet mountain road blocking traffic, filming with their phones, waiting to invade a cabin they had no right to step foot in. I felt the hum of my grandfather's warning again, steady and low vibrating through the earth beneath my boots. This was the moment the fight truly began. Karen waved her clipboard like it was scripture. From it, she pulled a folded document stamped with an official-looking seal. She held it high. This is our county-issued permit to host a community event at the Black Ridge Lake access point. Right here. She tapped the paper, dramatically smiling at the murmuring crowd. A few neighbors gasped, as if the sight of a government seal alone was proof of divine right. That was her trick, use the appearance of authority to silence opposition. But I wasn't most people. I stepped back toward my cabin, ignoring the chorus of whispers and Karen's smug voice echoing down the road. Inside my study, I unlocked my fireproof safe. My fingers brushed over my grandfather's watch, a family photo, and then landed on what mattered most, the deed. Crisp and worn at the edges, it bore my grandfather's name in faded ink, the very soul of this property pressed into paper. Alongside it was the county's 2020 amendment, the ironclad declaration that my parcel, Lot 9C, was permanently exempt from HOA jurisdiction. When I returned to the gate, I could hear the tension in the air. Mitch had grabbed the bars and was shaking them like a bull testing a fence. Karen, still posturing, was smiling like she'd already won. Behind them, kids ran circles in the dirt, parents opened coolers, and the whole scene looked more like a tailgate party than a standoff. I held the papers up steady and deliberate. My voice cut through the noise. This, I said, lifting the deed is ownership. My grandfather's name signed in ink that's older than your clipboard. This, I flipped to the amendment highlighted in bold font, is the county record. It says clear as daylight that Lot 9C is private property, not HOA, not community land, mine. For a heartbeat, silence fell. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One man muttered, "Wait, wasn't this public once?" "Yes," I said, letting the steel in my voice carry. "It was, until it was sold, recorded, and amended 4 years ago. And if you doubt me, check the county clerk's office yourself." Karen's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "That's an old document," she snapped. "Things change. We have today's permit." She shoved her forged paper against the gate bars so that the crowd could see. To the untrained eye, it looked convincing. A seal, a QR code, a signature. But I had dealt with the county enough times to know their paperwork inside and out. The seal was wrong, the QR code sloppy, the font not even close to official. "You can waive that fake permit all day long, Karen," I said calmly. "But the truth doesn't bend, because you want it to." That was when the crowd shifted their attention no longer on me, but on her. A few phones zoomed in on the documents in her hand, and I could hear the uncertainty ripple like wind through pine branches. And then, as if fate itself wanted to add fuel to the fire, I heard the low growl of a police cruiser cresting the hill. A patrol car eased through the chaos of parked vans, lights off but presence undeniable. The murmurs grew louder. Some people tucked their phones away. Others kept filming. Deputy Harris, a young man with a reputation for being by the book, stepped out. His hand rested casually near his belt, as he scanned the scene, the vans clogging the road, the 100 gawking guests, Karen with her clipboard raised like a scepter, Mitch gripping my gate with red knuckles, and me standing steady on my side, with my deed in one hand. "What's going on here?" he asked evenly, his voice carrying authority that no clipboard ever could. Karen was on him instantly, like a predator scenting opportunity. "Deputy, thank goodness you're here. This man," she jabbed her finger toward me, "is illegally blocking a community event. We have a permit." She shoved the forged paper into his hand. I watched Harris's eyes skim it. The furrow in his brow told me everything. He'd spotted what I had: the wrong seal, the bad code, the fake signature. He looked up at Karen, then at me. "Your side?" he asked. Wordlessly, I handed him the deed and the amendment. He read slow and careful. Then he reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Harris. Run parcel number Lot 9C. Confirm ownership and HOA status. Also check for any active event permits tied to this location." The radio crackled. The crowd hushed. Even Mitch loosened his grip on the gate. Seconds stretched like hours, until the dispatcher's voice came back crisp and final: parcel 9C registered to Nathan Gray. Confirmed exempt from Black Ridge HOA jurisdiction. No event permits filed for that address. A wave of silence washed over the gathering. You could hear the tension snap. Karen's smile froze, her eyes flickering with panic. Mitch muttered something under his breath and stepped back. Deputy Harris handed the permit back to Karen. His voice was firm. "This document is not valid, ma'am." Then, in clear view of the crowd, he uncapped a red pen and wrote across the page VOID. A few people actually laughed. Others grumbled, angry at having been dragged out for nothing. The tide had turned, and Karen could feel it. She tried to recover, puffing up her chest and insisting there must be some mistake. But the mistake was hers, carved in red ink for all to see. As the crowd began to disperse, grumbling about wasted time, I stood tall behind my locked gate, my deed in one hand and the weight of vindication in the other. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Karen realized she wasn't untouchable. And I realized something else too. Bullies never stop when they're humiliated. They only get meaner. This was just the beginning. If Karen's plan had ended with that forged permit being declared void, the story might have ended there. The crowd would have left embarrassed, Karen would have sulked home, and I'd be telling this story over a quiet cup of coffee. But people like Karen don't accept defeat. They thrive on control, and when their grip slips, they claw twice as hard. That day, her desperation drew in a bigger crowd, and the situation turned into something I could only describe as a siege. By the time Deputy Harris walked back to his patrol car, more vans had arrived. Their engines hummed in the distance as families poured out with coolers, folding chairs, and picnic baskets, all dressed like they were heading to some lakeside gala. Sundresses fluttered in the breeze, men in pressed polo shirts carried trays of food, and children ran through the dust, oblivious to the tension thick in the air. My quiet mountain road had become a makeshift parking lot and outdoor theater. I stood on my side of the gate, the iron bars cool beneath my fingers, watching as my home transformed into the backdrop of their spectacle. Some of them weren't even locals. I could tell by the way they looked around curiously, as though they were sightseeing. Karen had promised them a party venue by the lake, and now they were realizing that the lake belonged to me, not the HOA. But instead of sending them home, she doubled down. She raised her clipboard high and called out like a general addressing troops. "Everyone stay calm. The HOA has secured this space for today's retreat. We have a permit. This will be resolved shortly." Her words were loud, confident, but her voice carried the faintest tremor, the kind only someone like me watching closely could hear. She was bluffing, and she knew it, but her audience didn't. Phones lifted into the air, recording everything. Some people live-streamed to social media. I could see little red dots glowing as cameras blinked. I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was fighting 100 lenses, each one ready to twist the story. Mitch, her bulldog of a husband, paced in front of the gate like a caged animal, his jaw-clenched fists tightening and loosening at his sides. He looked at me the way predators look at prey, like he was just waiting for the right moment to strike. More than once he grabbed the gate and shook it violently, testing my welds. The clang of steel against steel echoed across the clearing, a sound meant to intimidate. I didn't flinch. Behind him, a familiar figure appeared, Joey, my well-meaning but hapless neighbor. He coasted up on his bike, his face caught somewhere between curiosity and guilt. "Is there valet parking?" he whispered to me with a half-smile, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. I didn't return it. He meant well, but his presence only added to the absurdity. Karen took the opportunity to shift gears. She waved her forged permit again, holding it high so the crowd could see. "This is county approved," she insisted. "The community has a right to this property. Mr. Gray is being difficult." I stepped forward, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "This land has never been community property. Not once. And your permit is fake. I have the deed, the county survey, and the amendment exempting this land from your HOA. Everything you're saying is a lie." I held the deed up again, this time angling it toward one of my cameras mounted on the trees. The lens drank in every detail the faded ink of my grandfather's signature, the highlighted clause from the county record that declared Lot 9C outside of HOA control. I wanted the footage to be undeniable, admissible in any court, if it came to that. But Karen, ever the performer, pivoted to the crowd. She spread her arms like she was welcoming them to a stage. "Neighbors, this is about community spirit. Are we going to let one stubborn man deny us the joy of coming together?" Her words rippled through the group. Some nodded hesitantly. Others murmured in agreement. A few turned their phones on me, as if waiting for me to explode to prove her narrative right. The weight of all those eyes was heavy, but I refused to bend. I pointed back toward my cabin. Community spirit doesn't come from stealing. It doesn't come from lies. It comes from respect, and respect means knowing the difference between yours and mine. A hush settled fragile and thin. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd reached them. But then Mitch stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Enough of this," he barked. "Just open the damn gate. Karen's trying to do something nice. Stop acting like a paranoid hermit." I didn't move. The gate between us wasn't just iron and steel, it was a line. Crossing it would mean giving up everything my grandfather had built, everything I had protected. My silence infuriated him further. He slammed his fist against the gate so hard the metal vibrated. A few guests gasped. Karen, sensing her control slipping, tried one last push. "You're embarrassing yourself, Nathan. Do you want to be the man remembered for shutting out your own neighbors, or do you want to be part of something bigger?" Her words were honeyed poison, but I saw the truth in her eyes, fear. She wasn't fighting for community. She was fighting for dominance. And if I gave her an inch, she'd take miles. So I turned to the crowd, lifting the deed once more. "This isn't about embarrassment. This isn't about neighbors. This is about law. This land is mine, legally, historically, and permanently. And no forged permit or clipboard changes that." The murmurs grew again, but this time they weren't so sympathetic to her. Someone whispered, "Wait, didn't the deputy just say the permit was void?" Another added, "If it's his land, why are we even here?" Phones that had been aimed at me shifted back toward her. Karen's mask cracked for a split second. Her smile slipped, her grip on the clipboard tightening. She knew she was losing the room. That was when the first group of guests started to peel away. A family gathered their cooler and chairs, muttering about wasted time. Another couple shook their heads and returned to their van. One by one, the crowd began to unravel, but Karen didn't retreat. She stood her ground, clipboard trembling in her hands, eyes locked on me with a fury I could almost feel. Mitch growled under his breath, pacing like a bull itching for a fight. I knew then that this was only the opening act. Karen wouldn't forgive humiliation. She'd find another angle, another lie, another way to strike back. And Mitch, well, his body language told me he wasn't going to settle for walking away quietly. I tightened my grip on the gate handle, bracing myself. The storm wasn't passing. It was only gathering strength. The murmuring of the crowd hadn't died down when another set of headlights crested the hill. This time, the patrol car rolled in with a quiet authority that silenced even the children darting between vans. Its presence cut through the chaos like a knife. The cruiser eased to a stop, tires crunching, gravel, and the air shifted. For the first time that morning, I felt the weight of law at my back. The door opened, and out stepped Deputy Cole. He was young, but his reputation carried ahead of him. People in town said he was by the book, stubborn about details, and impossible to sway with theatrics. Exactly the kind of man I needed at that gate. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, and when his eyes swept over the gathering, you could see the calculation, the kind that measures a situation in seconds and decides who's bluffing. "What's going on here?" His tone was even controlled, but there was an edge underneath, the kind of edge that made people hesitate before lying. Karen, of course, leapt forward like a starving wolf spotting a scrap of meat. "Deputy, thank goodness you're here. This man is obstructing a designated community event. We have a permit." She shoved her clipboard at him, paper thrust like a sword. I watched his face as he took it. His eyes scanned the seal, the QR code, the typewritten signature. His brow furrowed just slightly. Enough for me to know he'd seen what I had, sloppy work details that didn't line up, official formatting that screamed forgery. He didn't call her out, not yet. Instead, he turned toward me. "Sir, your side of the story." I stepped closer, holding my papers steady in both hands. "This is my deed," I said, my voice steady but carrying enough for the crowd to hear. "It bears my grandfather's name." And this, I lifted the amendment. The crucial clause, highlighted in bold font, is the 2020 county record that exempts my parcel, Lot 9C, from HOA jurisdiction. No association, no authority. This property is private. He took my documents without hesitation. The contrast was stark. Where he'd scanned Karen's paper with suspicion, he handled mine with the careful respect of someone reading truth. After a beat, he pulled his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, this is Cole. Run parcel Lot 9C, registered to Nathan Gray. Confirm ownership, HOA status, and check for any active event permits tied to this address." The crowd held its breath. Phones hovered higher. Karen's confident smile froze, though she tried to mask it. Mitch stopped pacing his fists, flexing at his sides. Even Joey leaned forward on his bike, wide-eyed. The radio crackled. Then came the voice, sharp and final: "Parcel Lot 9C, registered to Nathan Gray. Property exempt from Black Ridge HOA jurisdiction. No active permits on file for that address." The words hit like a hammer. You could almost hear the collective exhale of the crowd. Some shook their heads. Others muttered under their breath. One woman in a sundress snapped her phone shut with a sound of disgust. "We drove an hour for this," Deputy Cole nodded, once crisp and professional. He handed Karen's permit back to her. "This document is not valid, ma'am." He uncapped a pen from his chest pocket and in deliberate, unhurried strokes wrote across the page in thick red letters, "Void." The sound of pen on paper was louder than any shout. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Someone actually clapped once before their partner hushed them. Karen's jaw clenched so hard, I thought she might crack a tooth. Her clipboard trembled in her hands. She tried to rally. "Deputy, with all due respect, this is a misunderstanding. Mr. Gray is clearly misinterpreting," Cole cut her off, voice firm. "Ma'am, the county records are clear. This is private property. The HOA has no jurisdiction here. Your permit is invalid. I'm instructing you to disperse your guests and clear the roadway. Emergency vehicles require access." That last line was deliberate, and I knew it. He wasn't just speaking as a referee. He was invoking safety law, something no clipboard or bluff could override. The murmurs turned to grumbling. Guests began hauling coolers back to their vans. A man muttered, "Dragged us out here for nothing." Another shook his head, saying, "She knew. She had to know." Phones that had been pointed at me now swung toward Karen, recording her flushed face, her forced smile, her authority crumbling under red ink, and a deputy's word. I should have felt relief, vindication, and I did partly. But even as the crowd began to thin, my gaze locked with Mitch's. He hadn't moved. His jaw was tight, his eyes like shards of granite drilling into me through the bars of the gate. He wasn't defeated, he was simmering, and when men like Mitch simmer, they explode. Cole turned back to me. "You're within your rights, Mr. Gray. Do you want to press trespassing charges?" For a moment I considered it. Watching Karen squirm while her husband paced like a bull on a short leash, the idea was tempting. But something told me this wasn't the moment. Not yet. The war wasn't won with the first skirmish. Sometimes you had to let your opponent think they still had moves to play. I shook my head. "Not today, Deputy. But I want the record clear, this is private land. They had no right to be here." "Understood." He made a note in his log, calm and efficient. Then he turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, disperse your guests. Now." Her smile cracked at last. "This isn't over," she hissed under her breath, low enough that only I could hear. "No," I said, meeting her gaze without blinking. "It's not." And in that moment I knew it for certain. Karen's humiliation would fester and Mitch's rage would boil over. Today was just the first round. As the last van pulled away, the dust settling behind it, I leaned against the iron bars of my gate. My cheek itched with the weight of their stares, my heart still pounding. But my resolve was steel. This land was mine, and I would not yield. The deputy pulled away his cruiser, disappearing into the trees. The road grew quiet again. But it wasn't the peaceful quiet of dawn. It was the silence before a storm, and I could feel it coming. When the last of the vans rumbled down the hill and the crowd dispersed, I thought maybe, just maybe, the worst of the storm had passed. But storms don't vanish. They shift direction. And Mitch Gerber, Karen's husband, wasn't a man who could swallow humiliation. Not when his wife's authority had been shredded in front of half the neighborhood. I stayed by the gate, watching the dust settle in the late afternoon light. The iron bars between us stood like a fortress wall. Deputy Cole remained nearby, guiding traffic off the narrow road and finishing his notes. Most of the guests were gone, muttering curses about wasted Saturdays. But Mitch stayed rooted to the spot, his arms crossed, chest heaving like a bull held back by a fence just before the charge. Karen was still sputtering, her face pale and lips pressed thin, but she had at least enough sense to retreat toward their SUV. Mitch didn't budge. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking hard as flint. "This isn't over, pal," he growled. His voice was low, but carried through the bars. "You embarrassed my wife." I gave a weary shrug, the kind meant to sting more than any words. She embarrassed herself. She waved around a fake permit and tried to steal my land. I just pointed out the facts. It was the wrong thing to say. Men like Mitch don't deal in facts. They deal in dominance. And I just twisted the knife in his pride. His jaw-clenched muscles working like gears grinding steel. He shifted his stance, pacing back and forth in front of the gate, every step tighter, every turn sharper. I knew the signs: red neck, white knuckles, eyes narrowing like he was calculating distance. He wasn't leaving. He was winding up. Deputy Cole was 30 feet away, focused on coaxing one last van into a proper turnaround. His back was to us. For a brief moment, I considered stepping back from the gate, creating distance, denying Mitch his shot. But my grandfather's voice echoed in my head. Never throw the first punch, but always be ready for it. So I stood my ground, calm, still, hands at my sides. Mitch made his move with the subtlety of a street hustler. He feinted like he was turning to walk away, even muttered something under his breath. Then with a sudden burst, he pivoted and drove his fist straight through the 4-inch gap between the bars. The punch was fast fueled by rage and humiliation. His knuckles connected squarely with my cheekbone. Pain exploded across my face, a white-hot flash that stole my breath for half a second. My head snapped sideways, stars bursting in my vision. I stumbled but didn't fall. The sound was a grotesque duet, the wet smack of flesh against flesh, followed by the sharp metallic clang of his ring, scraping the iron bars. Gasps rippled down the road. Someone shouted. Phones shot up instantly, recording every angle. I straightened slowly, my hand pressed against the throbbing bruise blossoming on my cheek. Blood tinged my lip, coppery and bitter. But beneath the pain, something colder settled in me. Calm, methodical, calculated. Mitch had just made the dumbest move of his life. He'd assaulted me on my property in front of witnesses, with at least 3 cameras rolling, including my own security system staring straight at the gate. Deputy Cole spun around at the noise. His eyes widened when he saw me staggering, then narrowed when he spotted Mitch shaking out his fist, pride flashing in his eyes like he'd finally claimed some kind of victory. "That's it," Cole barked. His voice dropped the professional calm and sharpened into steel. He crossed the distance in a blur, grabbing Mitch's arm and wrenching it behind his back with a practiced twist. The crack of bone and grunt of pain echoed in the still air. "What the hell?" Mitch protested, his words cut off, as Cole slammed him against the bars of my gate, the same iron he had tried to reach through. "You're under arrest for assault," Cole said flatly. His handcuffs clicked shut with finality. "Hands behind your back. Now," Karen shrieked from the SUV. "You can't do that. He was defending me." Cole ignored her voice, steady as he read. "Mitch's rights, every syllable, another nail in the coffin of their perfect Saturday. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The crowd had thinned, but enough lingered to catch it all on camera. A few neighbors smirked openly. Others shook their heads. Joey, still perched on his bike, muttered, "Well, I was on Team Potato Salad, but after that punch I'm switching sides." Cole marched Mitch toward the patrol car. Karen scrambled after them in her heels, shrieking about formal complaints and abuse of power. Cole didn't even glance her way. "Ma'am, you're free to file anything you like, so long as you don't step in front of my car." She froze like she'd hit a glass wall. I stood behind my gate cheek, swelling lip, bleeding heart, hammering but steady. I hadn't thrown a punch. I hadn't crossed the line. Mitch had, and every second of it was on video. Cole secured him in the back of the cruiser. Mitch ducked his head reluctantly, still snarling. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Cole replied, firmly slamming the door with a decisive thunk. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat and swelling spread under my skin. Pain flared, but with it came clarity. This wasn't just about a bruise. This was about the principle my grandfather had drilled into me, defending your patch of earth, no matter the cost. When Cole returned, his eyes scanned my face. "Sir, do you need an ambulance?" I shook my head, wincing. "I'll be all right, but I want to press charges. Assault, on record." He nodded once, professional mask slipping into something close to approval. "Good call. My body cam caught it too. Between that and your security footage, it's airtight. Karen hovered nearby, her face pale, lips trembling with fury, but no words left to spin. Her clipboard hung limp at her side. For the first time all day, she looked small. I looked her straight in the eye, blood on my lip, swelling in my cheek, and said quietly, "You brought this on yourselves." Her gaze flickered just for a moment. A crack in the armor. The patrol car pulled away taillights, glowing red against the darkening trees. Mitch was gone, Karen left behind with nothing but humiliation and a clipboard full of lies. The road fell quiet again, but I knew better. This wasn't the end. For people like Karen, there's always another move, another scheme, another act of desperation, and I'd be ready for it. The adrenaline from Mitch's assault hadn't yet faded when dusk settled over the ridge. My cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, the bruise swelling into a hard knot of pain, but I refused to leave the gate until the last echo of the patrol car's engine disappeared down the hill. Karen lingered in her SUV long after her husband was taken away, staring at me through the windshield as if she could will herself back into control. Finally, she slammed her door and sped off gravel, spitting from her tires. The mountain grew quiet again, though it wasn't the peaceful quiet I loved. It was the tense silence of a battlefield waiting for the next volley. I should have gone inside, iced my face, and let the night swallow the chaos. Instead, I sat in my study with the security feeds pulled up across 3 monitors. My grandfather used to say a man who builds walls must also watch them, and tonight I felt that truth in my bones. The iron gate stood closed, its locks gleaming in the moonlight. The cameras swept the perimeter in grayscale, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. By midnight, I'd almost convinced myself Karen would lick her wounds and retreat, at least for the night. But entitlement doesn't sleep. At 1:24, 3 a.m. motion alerts pinged across my phone. Camera 4, the one pointed at the main road, lit up with headlights crawling slowly toward my property. I leaned forward, heart tightening. It wasn't a police cruiser this time. It was a box truck, large and unmarked, rolling to a stop in the same place Karen's SUV had idled that morning. The driver killed the lights. 2 figures slipped out of the cab, their movements quiet and purposeful. My gut sank. This wasn't random. This was planned. I zoomed the feed, sharpening the night vision resolution. They moved to the back of the truck, rolled up the door, and began unloading equipment, large, bulky shapes that gleamed pale under the infrared. White canvas, metal poles, folding chairs stacked in neat rows, catering gear. Karen hadn't accepted defeat. She'd escalated. I watched in disbelief as they erected a massive event canopy right on the county right-of-way, mere feet from my property line. Under the pale moonlight, the white tent looked like a ghost rising from the roadside. Chairs unfolded in precise lines, heaters clanked onto the dirt, and decorative planters appeared as if mocking my quiet forest. It was a party venue constructed at midnight like a siege engine outside castle walls. Anger coiled in my chest, cold and deliberate. I could have stormed out with a knife and cut every strap, dragged their equipment into a heap, shown them what I thought of their invasion. But rage without strategy is weakness. My grandfather had taught me better. Instead, I reached for my phone, switched the camera feeds to record in high definition, and narrated every detail aloud: time, date, truck, license plate number of chairs, placement of canopy, evidence precise and irrefutable. When the crew finished, they vanished as silently as they'd come, leaving behind their creation, a pristine white pavilion looming against the dark pines, smug and defiant. I stepped out onto the gravel drive, boots crunching softly as I approached the boundary line. I didn't cross. I stood on my side, inches from the stakes, marking where my grandfather's land ended and the public right-of-way began. The canopy smelled faintly of factory plastic and damp night air. A rented heater was zip-tied carelessly to a young sapling, bending it almost to the ground. A coyote trotted past, sniffed at one of the decorative planters, and loped off without a glance. Even nature knew a fraud when it saw one. I pulled out my phone again, taking slow, sweeping video like I was documenting a crime scene. Because that's exactly what this was: illegal dumping, obstruction of a public thoroughfare, a deliberate act of harassment designed to intimidate me. "See you in the morning," I muttered to the empty chairs, then turned back toward my cabin. Inside, I copied the video files twice, labeling one folder, Dumping, Evidence A. Then I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. The dispatcher answered groggily, clearly pulled from the tail end of a long shift. "Sheriff's Department, what's your issue?" I laid it out calmly, methodically: the truck, the equipment, the location on the county right-of-way, the time-stamped video, the clear plate number. I referenced the case number Deputy Cole had filed earlier that day. The dispatcher paused, typing rapidly. "So, they dumped commercial equipment blocking the lane." "Correct," I said. "A full event canopy, 50 chairs, multiple heaters, planters. It narrows the lane below legal minimum. I have it all on video. Her voice sharpened. Illegal dumping was a hot-button issue in our county, especially commercial dumping. All right, sir, we'll send a unit out tonight. An hour later, headlights swept my gate again. A different deputy stepped out, older, gruffer, his voice tinged with disbelief as I showed him the footage. He walked the perimeter of the setup, shaking his head. Well, I'll be damned. That's brazen. He got on his radio, confirmed the status of the right-of-way, and began writing tickets. One citation for obstruction of a public thoroughfare. Another far more expensive for illegal commercial dumping. He taped both citations to the canopy's support pole, sealed in plastic so they wouldn't blow away. The catering company's about to have a very bad morning, he said dryly, handing me the incident number. County Public Works will likely impound all this by sunrise and charge the owners for removal. I nodded relief, mixing with grim satisfaction. The caterer's invoice would trace straight back to whoever hired them. And we both knew who that was. When he left the canopy, stood alone, its white canvas glowing faintly in the moonlight, the tickets fluttering in the breeze like scarlet letters of shame. It was Karen's defiance, made physical, her refusal to accept defeat. But it was also her next mistake, recorded, cited, and about to cost her dearly. I lingered a moment longer, letting the night wash over me. The forest hummed with its steady rhythm, the kind my grandfather once told me you could only hear if you stood still enough. The land hadn't betrayed me. The law hadn't betrayed me. The only betrayal here was Karen's to her neighbors, to her community, and to her own crumbling authority. As I turned back toward the cabin, I realized something. She thought she was playing chess, but she was predictable. Every move she made only tightened the noose, and I was keeping every receipt. Morning came not with the peace of birdsong and lake mist, but with the metallic groan of a county tow truck. I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee cheeks still swollen and purple from Mitch's sucker punch, and watched as workers dismantled Karen's midnight canopy piece by piece. Chairs were stacked and hauled away. Heaters clanked onto a flatbed. The once pristine tent sagged as its poles were yanked free, collapsing in a heap of canvas and shame. It was gone in less than an hour, leaving nothing but tire tracks and the 2 citations the deputy had taped to the pole. I didn't celebrate, not outwardly. But inside, there was a cold satisfaction. Karen had tried to defy me to build her party on the very edge of my land, and instead she had handed me more ammunition. Every citation, every incident report, every video file was another brick in the wall. I was building a wall, not of iron, but of paper and law. After the trucks rumbled away, I went inside and opened my filing cabinet. Years of HOA nonsense spilled from the folders, misdirected violation notices, newsletters addressed to resident instead of my name, petty warnings about trash cans and lawn heights that had nothing to do with me. My grandfather, a carpenter turned lawyer before he built the cabin, had drilled one lesson into me: the man with the best records usually wins. So I'd saved everything. For hours I combed through the pile, pulling anything that referenced my property. And then I found it a smoking gun hidden in a newsletter from 3 years back. It was a dull little article about boundary clarifications. But one line leapt out, underlined in my own handwriting. We remind all residents that Lot 9C, formerly the Black Ridge HOA Lake Access, was decommissioned and sold in 2020. This is now private property and should be respected as such. There it was, in print. From the HOA itself, Karen couldn't claim ignorance. She had been a board member at the time. She had surely read this. Her crusade wasn't confusion. It was calculated fraud. I slid the newsletter into a plastic sleeve and placed it in a new binder. Alongside it, I added the deed, the county amendment, photos of my bruised face, the police report from Mitch's arrest, screenshots of the citations taped to the canopy. I labeled the binder's spine in bold black marker Gerber. This wasn't just for me anymore. It was for them, for the court, for the board, for anyone foolish enough to think Karen spoke with authority. That evening, I called my attorney, Miss Patel. She had been my grandfather's lawyer years ago, and she carried herself with the same kind of steel spine he admired. When I explained what had happened, the fake permit, the assault, the midnight tent, she didn't gasp or sympathize. She chuckled low and sharp. "Nathan, you've done everything right so far. Send me what you have. All of it." I digitized the Gerber binder, uploading video files, photos, scanned documents. Watching those clips again, the punch, the canopy rising in the night, fueled me with a cold fire. By midnight, every piece of evidence sat neatly in a secure folder on her desk. 2 days later, she called me back. "It's airtight," she said. "The assault charge against Mitch will stick. The restraining order will go through. But Karen," she paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "She's exposed. Forgery, fraud, abuse of authority. We could drag her through court for years, but there may be a faster way. Her plan was simple and devastating: use Karen's own HOA against her. A lawsuit would be long and messy, but if the board realized their president had lied, forged documents, and endangered them with personal liability, they'd turn on her themselves. We just need proof she knew your property was exempt, Patel said. I told her about the newsletter, about Karen's history on the board. She agreed it was good, but she wanted something stronger, something personal, undeniable. That proof came from an unexpected place. The next morning, an anonymous email appeared in my inbox. No subject line beyond Black Ridge HOA. The sender's address was gibberish. The message was short: Karen Gerber is out of control. Check the board meeting minutes from February 2020. She knew about the parcel sale. She typed it herself. My heart kicked. I opened the HOA's public archive and scrolled through the scanned minutes. And there it was in black and white, the motion to formally recognize the county's sale of the lake access to my grandfather. Listed among the board members present that day was Karen Gerber, then the secretary, and the minutes were typed by her hand. She had documented the very decision that exempted my land. She hadn't just known. She had written it. The email had given me dynamite, but the whistleblower wasn't finished. Hours later, a second email arrived, this one with a forwarded chain between Karen and the HOA's own lawyer from just 3 weeks prior. Karen, I'm planning the summer retreat at the Old Lake access point. I know there was some paperwork, but I intend to proceed for the good of the community. Lawyer Karen, I strongly advise against this. The gray parcel is private. HOA has no jurisdiction. Proceeding exposes us all to liability. Karen, thank you for your legal opinion. I'll take it under advisement. Chilling words. Proof she had been warned in writing and chosen defiance anyway. I forwarded everything to Miss Patel. She nearly purred with satisfaction. Perfect. This isn't just negligence. This is willful misconduct. Time to tighten the vice. Together we drafted a formal demand letter not to Karen but to the entire board. It was a masterpiece of quiet devastation, each fact laid out chronologically, supported by exhibits. Exhibit A, the deed. Exhibit B, the county amendment. Exhibit C, the HOA's own newsletter acknowledging my property. Exhibit D, the 2020 meeting minutes signed by Karen herself. Exhibit E, the lawyer's email chain warning her not to proceed. The letter ended with a threat as sharp as barbed wire. Unless the board removed Karen immediately and rectified the damages, we would file a multi-count civil lawsuit not only against the HOA as a whole, but against each board member, personally, for gross negligence. It wasn't just a letter. It was a guillotine blade poised above their necks. We mailed and emailed it to every member of the board, and then we waited. It didn't take long. Within 24 hours, word came back through Miss Patel. An emergency board meeting had been called. Karen was furious, shouting that the emails were fake, that I was orchestrating harassment. But the rest of the board was panicking. They hadn't signed up for personal liability. They hadn't signed up for Karen's vendetta. The walls around her were closing in. And for the first time since this began, I felt not just defensive, but offensive. This wasn't survival anymore. This was a counter-strike. The emergency HOA meeting wasn't held in some courtroom or grand chamber. It took place in the community clubhouse, a squat beige building with fluorescent lights that buzzed louder than the voices inside. I wasn't there, miss. Patel had advised me to stay away, but my whistleblower, Dana, the current board secretary, relayed everything to her and through her to me. The boardroom was already tense when the members gathered. Karen walked in first, head held high, clutching that ever-present clipboard like it was a shield. Mitch, recently released on bail, didn't show his restraining order, kept him well away from my property, and even Karen knew better than to flaunt that. Still, she carried herself like a queen entering her court expecting loyalty. But the mood had shifted. The treasurer sat stiff-backed with his copy of our demand letter spread before him. The vice president tapped a pen nervously against the table, refusing to meet Karen's eyes. Dana sat silently, recording every word with the board's official device, the red light blinking like a warning beacon. Karen opened the meeting with bravado. This emergency session is to address the false allegations brought by Nathan Gray and his attorney. I remind you all that this is a courtesy meeting, not a trial. Her words landed flat. The treasurer cleared his throat. Karen, with respect, it feels very much like a trial when we're staring at Exhibit E. He held up the email chain, the one where the HOA's own lawyer had told her in writing not to proceed. You received legal counsel. You ignored it. You put us all at risk. Karen's smile flickered. She tried to wave it off, talking about community spirit, about misunderstandings. But Dana slid the 2020 meeting minutes across the table. You typed these, Dana said quietly. You were present when the sale of Lot 9C was recognized. You documented it yourself. You knew. The vice president spoke next, his voice shaking with restrained anger. Karen, you dragged 100 people onto private property with a forged permit. You put us in the path of a lawsuit. If Mr. Gray presses charges, we're all personally liable. At that, the room erupted. Voices overlapped. Fear, anger, blame. Someone shouted, "My wife told me not to come tonight. She said you're going to get us sued over a picnic." Another muttered, "Insurance won't cover intentional fraud." Karen slammed her gavel, but the crack of wood on plastic only deepened the chaos. For the first time, she looked cornered. Desperate. She reached for the recorder, perhaps hoping to erase the record, but the vice president caught her wrist. "Touch it, and I move to censure," he warned. That was the breaking point. The treasurer leaned forward, his face red with fury. "You lied to us. You lied to everyone. And you put this entire association in danger. I won't pay for your arrogance." Dana told me later that Karen's voice cracked when she finally admitted, "Yes, I received the email, but I acted for the good of the community." That excuse sealed her fate. The vote was swift, brutal, and nearly unanimous. Karen stripped of all event planning authority, Mitch banned from all community properties, pending his criminal trial, and most damning, the board agreeing to enter immediate settlement negotiations with me. In one night, Karen went from queen bee to pariah. The negotiations were handled by Miss Patel, but she kept me updated step by step. The board was terrified, eager to make the problem disappear. Their first offer was laughable, a formal apology. Patel hung up on them. Their second offer included a token reimbursement, which she shredded in a single sentence. She pressed harder, laying out the evidence like a guillotine blade. Finally, they capitulated. The settlement was everything we asked for, and more. First, a legally binding covenant recorded with the county, the Black Ridge HOA, and all its members forever relinquished any claim, real or imagined, to my land. It was permanent, tied to the parcel number, a peace treaty carved in stone. Second, full reimbursement for my legal fees, the cost of my medical report, and the filing of the restraining order. It wasn't about the money, it was about principle. They would pay for their mistakes. Third, and most satisfying, a mandatory printed retraction in the next HOA newsletter. In bold, unambiguous language, it declared Lot 9C private property exempt from HOA jurisdiction and off-limits to all members. The notice had to be approved by Miss Patel herself. The board signed it all. They had no choice. A week later, a courier delivered the documents to my gate. I held them in my hands, official, notarized, county recorded. The ink still smelled fresh. For the first time in months, the knot in my chest loosened. The fight was over. The final act came quietly. A small group of neighbors gathered at my gate, curious to witness the aftermath. Deputy Cole was there too, serving the permanent restraining order to Mitch, who stood sulking on the far side of the road. Karen came with him, smaller than I'd ever seen, her clipboard gone, shoulders hunched. She didn't speak. I laminated a copy of the deed, the page with my grandfather's signature, and affixed it to the inside of the gate. Then, in a steady voice, I read aloud the exemption clause from the county amendment. When I finished, Cole raised his voice. "The matter is settled. The HOA has no power here." Silence followed, heavy and absolute. A few neighbors clapped softly. Mitch scowled. Karen turned away, and the crowd dispersed. I stood there, a long moment, hand on the iron bars, before finally stepping back. Now, the lake is quiet again. My cheek has healed, though the scar inside runs deeper. But every morning as I sip coffee on the porch, I look at the laminated deed glowing in the sunrise and feel the hum of the land beneath my feet. The gate stands strong, cameras watching, silence returned. Karen lost her crown. Mitch faces his charges. The HOA surrendered in ink. And me, I kept my promise to my grandfather. No one makes me small on my own patch of earth. This wasn't just a victory. It was a lesson carved into iron and law proof that stubbornness, patience, and evidence can outlast arrogance and lies. Life has a way of testing our boundaries, sometimes through the arrogance of others, sometimes through the slow grind of conflict we never asked for. But this story reminds us that true strength isn't about shouting louder or swinging harder. It's about standing firm, keeping receipts, and trusting that truth has its own weight. Karen tried to bend reality with bravado, but the law, the facts, and persistence crushed her illusions. In our own lives, we face people who cross lines, who try to make us feel small on our own ground. The lesson is simple: don't yield. Document, defend, and stay calm. Boundaries matter, whether they're fences, gates, or the quiet principles we refuse to abandon. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever stood up against someone who thought they could push you around? And don't forget to subscribe. because there are more battles, more lessons, and more victories yet to come.